This is a topic that's important to me because I was at UNC Chapel Hill.
Oh, that's right.
If you want to root for a satanic university that has a blue devil that's between you and God. So at UNC Chapel Hill, when I was doing my master's there, a culture war broke out. Every year, UNC Chapel Hill celebrates National Coming Out Week. And a Christian just got hacked off and sent a letter to the newspaper, the Daily Tar Heel, complaining about it. It was pretty poignant. It was nasty. Of course, they printed it. And then pretty soon, members of the gay community were sending in letters. It got regional attention. It got national attention. I was working with Julia Wood, one of the top feminist theorists. And she knew I was a Christian. She said, okay, let's do this for your master's. This is crazy how these two communities are treating each other. So we took 3 members of the gay community, self-identified, and 3 members of a really conservative Christian group on campus. They agreed to come together for a 6-week project. Let's prepare to have a conversation about what separates your communities. So when week 6 came, it was dinner at my house. My wife made dinner, and then she left. She said, protect the China, was her last words. But the perspective taking really helped. 5 of the 6 participants felt like that really helped, even though it became pretty loud in the house. So when that finished, I decided to take an easier topic. I chose marriage for my PhD. And so I took couples that were stuck in gridlock, what we say that communication is making this worse, not better, in talking about our marital issues, and I created a program by which they could do perspective taking. So that's kind of my background when it comes to perspective taking. I think as Rick said, we're losing the ability to take each other's perspectives today in America. Deeply concerning. 69% of Americans believe that incivility has reached crisis levels. So we've got to learn to talk to each other. And Biola, this is my 13th year here, we feel pretty passionately about things. And as trained academics, we are opinionated people. So when things happen, very quickly can we jump in and start to offer our opinion. And like the book of Proverbs says, life and death is in the power of the tongue. And our communication can do great harm. It can also breathe life. But we tend to react pretty quickly. So let me show you a headline that caught my attention. The headline was, Professor Makes Students Stomp on Jesus. I remember reading about this thinking, well, that's just ridiculous. That kind of ticks me off. It was an assignment where he had his students write the name Jesus on a piece of paper, and then you were told to step on it. Well, that got me even more angry. It's like, we get stepped on all the time by culture, by the media, and now we have a professor at a university telling students to stomp on Jesus, and that's usually where the discourse ends today in the argument culture. That's all I need to know to be mad. That's all the information I need to send off a tweet, to send off an angry email, letter to the editor, whatever, but then you actually stop to hear the perspective of the professor who did this at Florida Atlantic University, DeAndre Poole, and this is what he says. In a communication class, I want to teach students the importance of a symbol, that symbols are incredibly important, that we have culture wars over symbols. What's the definition of marriage? What's the definition of patriotism, right? So I want to show them the importance of it. So I have them write the name Jesus on a piece of paper. I set it on the floor, and now I want you to step on it. I never said stomp, but please step on it. I need a symbol that they won't step on. If I say write my name, people are going to step on it like crazy. They might even gleefully step on it because they don't like the class. One person said to him, why don't you have Muhammad's name? He said, well, Muhammad won't stop people. People might gleefully step on Muhammad, but I picked Jesus simply because I want students not to step on it. And when they don't, I say to them, excuse me, your professor just told you to step on that name, and they'll say, I won't do that. Why? Because I love Jesus. And he says, but that's not Jesus. That's a symbol. Because I could have had you drawn the American flag, right? A really bad Pictionary picture of the American flag, and students wouldn't do it either. So that was the point of the assignment. Now, hearing that, it just caused me to pause. Now, I might think that the assignment wasn't the greatest assignment, but I get why he did it. I understand the background. By the way, he's a self-professed Christian, has taught Sunday school in his church for 20 years. He has no bone to pick with Jesus. It makes me think of this proverb. Proverbs 14:12, this is the New Living Translation. There is a path before each person that seems right, but it ends in death. Here's what we do in today's argument culture. We start at the end of the proverb. We say, hey, by the way, let me just tell you really quickly why signing that statement's death. Let me tell you very quickly why that exhibit is death. Let me tell you very quickly why your position is unequivocally death, and it'll send us on a slippery slope. That's the end of the proverb. But we forget the first part of the proverb. There is a way that seems right to a person. So for me to step back and say with DeAndre Poole, okay, why did this seem right to you? Because what I'm getting right now makes no sense to me whatsoever. I mean, to stomp on Jesus, that just makes me mad. But you're an educated professor. I just need to know, what were you thinking as you developed this position or this conviction? That backstory hopefully can have some really positive influences on me. So very quickly, we don't have time for much of this, because Rick and I actually want to have a conversation about the Decalogue art exhibit that was put up and is still up. But so very quickly, I think there's a lot of biblical. It's interesting that the Bible uses perspective taking in ways that even make us feel uncomfortable. I don't have time to go through all of these. I think Abraham and Isaac is fascinating, that God wants Abraham to understand what it's like to sacrifice a son. Now, we can have a huge theological debate on whether God ever actually intended for Abraham to carry it out. But I think us as readers, I think the purpose of the narrative is, but I want you to imagine what it's like to sacrifice a child, because I did, God says. I think Hosea is fascinating. Hosea, I want you to be a prophet. I want you to call an adulterous nation back to me. And in order to help you do that, I want you to marry a woman who is not going to be faithful, who's going to be promiscuous. Now you get a little bit, Hosea, what I feel like in calling this nation back to myself. I think the whole book of Ecclesiastes, I want you to imagine what life is like under the sun. Under the sun means let's set aside God for a second. Let's set aside any transcendent meaning. Now, what does education do for you? What does beauty do for you? What does wealth do for you? We pick this up in the book in the New Testament. Book of Hebrews, find it fascinating that the writer would say, I want you to remember those in prison as if you were there yourself. Remember also those being mistreated as if you felt their pain in your own body. Fascinating that he would say that. I would make the argument that Jesus, the incarnation, is God doing perspective taking with humanity. Hebrews 4:15, we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses. In the Greek, sympathize means knowledge by way of common experience. So Jesus knows something about humanity because he did divine perspective taking. Let's define perspective taking very quickly. These are two psychologists. Communication theory borrows from psychology a lot. Describes perspective taking as the capacity to assume and maintain another's point of view, and is, according to them, the basic social cognitive process in communication. But take a look at the first part of that definition. The capacity to assume and maintain another's point of view. We don't buy that as a Christian community. We don't buy that as a value. Actually, we police that value very strongly. Some of you know that early on, and give me credit, I did this before tenure, I have my students read the Quran cover to cover, my comm theory class. When they finish, they're part of 1% of American Christians who have ever read another book of a different faith tradition. Well, when I started doing that, I got calls from parents. Joy, I'm so glad that Todd Lewis took the brunt of it. And these parents would say to me, I did not send my daughter to Biola to read the Quran. And I simply said, can I ask why you sent her here? Because I want her to be a Christ follower. And I said, do you know that the Great Commission we take very seriously at Biola, and 1 out of 5 people identify as being Muslim in the world? So we want to understand their perspective. And again, all they're doing is reading it. But listen, we're not going to evaluate it right away. We're going to seek to understand. Now, that worked for 2 parents. One parent was like, that's ridiculous. How will you feel at night if one of your students reads the Quran and walks away from the faith? How will you sleep at night? These are powerful questions, but do you get the fear behind parents saying to read it is to condone it? And if we have that kind of perspective, we're never going to really engage in perspective taking with people outside our community. But there's pretty strong opinions in our community that we need to do perspective taking. So I assume your perspective, I don't judge it, I assume it, and live within your worldview and your perspective. I want to know intellectually what it's like, but I also want to know how it affects my body. We call that embodied perspective taking. We'll get to that in a second. The goal is to create cognitive complexity. And for my comm students, I want you to have a complex view of many different things. Very quickly, here's cognitive complexity. The definition is, cognitive complexity refers to how elaborate or complex a person's interpretive processes are along the three dimensions of differentiation, abstraction, and organization. See, we're very elaborate when it comes to some things and not elaborate when we come to other things, right? Many of us have a very elaborate view of one aspect of our discipline, but we know nothing of another discipline. So we might know a lot about philosophy, but not much about art. So we do have elaborate worldviews, but the goal of cognitive complexity is I have the ability to create a complex view if I choose to. So let's take a look at these very quickly, each element. First is differentiation. I love this. It's measured by how many distinct interpretations an individual uses to perceive and describe others. So I'm a huge Detroit fan. Yes, the Tigers are not in the playoffs. And the Lions should be 4-0, except for a stupid 10-second runoff rule. Can I just get an amen from anybody? Okay, yes, you're right, good. So how many interpretations do you have? When we were little kids, I have two older brothers. A family friend took us to Tiger Stadium to watch the Tigers play. We're in right field, it's super hot. In front of us is an African-American couple eating fried chicken. It smelled unbelievable. The three Muehlhoff boys were like vultures, just smelling this and looking at this. The woman noticed, of course she noticed, and she turned around and said to me, if your dad says it's okay, now it wasn't my dad, it was a family friend, but if your dad says it's okay, you can have some. We're like, yes, yes. So I turned to the family friend and I said, hey, she said we could have some. I'll never forget his response. He put his hand on my knee, squeezed it, said to her, no thank you, and then whispered in my ear, we don't take food from those kind. Okay, now stop for a second. What's your immediate interpretation is what? He's racist. Okay, racist. Very interesting point about cognitive complexity. If you only have one interpretation and it happens to be right, you're still not cognitively complex. So I force my students, and I'll ask you very quickly, what could be other interpretations? Let's force ourselves to come up with other interpretations of that response. Why would he have that response? Thoughts? Yeah, Matt. Yes, and you would think that's silly? You would think that's silly? I have three boys who played Little League Baseball and one got drafted by the Yankees. I said to my oldest son, Mike, let me just say a couple things right now. That uniform doesn't come in this house. I will cheer for the team. I will say go blue. I will say go boys. I will never say go Yankees. Dad, really? Yes. Noreen said to me, are you that small? Yeah, another interpretation. Another interpretation.
Vegetarian.
Okay, we have vegetarian. We don't eat chicken.
From the wrong chicken place.
From the wrong chicken place. What else? Strangers. We don't, by principle, we don't take food from strangers. What else? Allergies. Allergies or sanitary issues. I took my kids to go see Thomas the Train. What was that thing called? Thomas the Engine? What a horrible thing, right? I'm bored to death watching it. Oh, sorry. John. I wish I had time to do perspective taking. I don't. Because I'm on time limit. Yeah, no, so let me just say.
You beg to differ.
I beg to, I'll leave it at that. I beg to differ. Thank you so much. But this woman in front of us we're watching, my three boys, they're young. She's eating popcorn and it's falling into the bucket. She's eating, but things are going into the bucket. Then she turns, notices me and says, oh, would your kids like some? I'm like, no. Okay, so those all could be reasons. But I force my students to say, you've got to have more than one interpretation. Okay, I don't like the Nashville statement, you might think. Okay, give me more interpretations of why they created it. Right, I didn't like the Decalogue exhibit. I think it was really X. Give me more interpretations. The prioritization report. Okay, give me more interpretations. You think it was insensitive? You think it was, okay, give me more interpretations. You can't just have one. Well, I don't need more than one because I'm right. No, you're not cognitively complex. And our argument culture today is I just need one opinion. I'm locked and loaded and ready to go. Differentiation is incredibly important. Why my spouse acted this way. Why a chair acted this way, right? Why the president acts this way. By the way, I'm a part of a teaching team at a church, and we start each service by answering questions. And a person submitted a question, anonymous, saying, I hate President Trump because of what he did with DACA. I think he's evil. And I got up and said, I'm so glad this is anonymous. I'm not a Trump person. But can we just stop for a second and have different interpretations of why he's doing what he's doing? And when we get to organization, that's the most important one. So first, you just have one interpretation of a person that's not cognitively complex and it's not ultimately helpful. The next one is this. Focus on the extent to which an individual interprets others in terms of internal motives, personality traits, and character. So what fostered this person at Tiger Stadium to say this? Well, what happened in 1968 in Detroit? Race riots. They just made a movie of it called Detroit. My dad called 3 times from General Motors, told my mom to pack everything up in the car, we're leaving. They called the National Guard, created a perimeter. And I remember my dad driving us around the perimeter, looking at tanks in the streets of Detroit. Well, our family friend had a business, did not have adequate insurance, lost the business. And that's why he has anger towards African Americans. Now, by the way, that doesn't justify that comment, but it gives me just a little bit of context to understand the pain of losing a business they never got back. He was never able to recover financially from it. So feeling the pain and the angst of that, I think, is important. I think this is the most important one. It's called organization. The degree to which individuals notice and are able to make sense of contradictory interpretations. So am I able to have a different interpretation? Am I able to notice something positive about President Trump? So what I said that day in church is I said, listen, off the top of my head, I can think of 3 things that I think are positive. 1, he gave $1 million of his own dollars towards Harvey relief. 2, unlike President Obama, he said to Syrian government, you will not use chemicals on your people. That is a line in the sand, and I will have a military response. The government did, and he did respond militarily. And then the third one is he campaigned on the VA, on how we treat our veterans, and he's put in new leadership and funneled a lot of money. So I can at least think of tipping my hat, right? So when it comes to anything, the Nashville statement, the prioritization report, the Jesus mural, right? Can I stop long enough to say, but I can have different interpretations and maybe see the positiveness of it. Whether I agree with it or not, but I can stop and say, okay, I see where you're coming from, and I see that that is a good thing. I still have my reservations, but I can see how that's a good thing. I think it's really important. This is Adolf Eichmann, the mastermind of the death camps, Hitler's final solution. Elie Wiesel went to the trial and went expecting to see the devil incarnate. And he was really shaken because he didn't encounter a devil. In a book called One Generation After, this is what Elie Wiesel says. Adolf Eichmann was an ordinary man. He slept well. He ate well. He was an exemplary father, a considerate husband. He was a man like any other. So even he could look at Eichmann and say, but I can see, hearing the testimonies, that he was a good leader in some ways. He was a good father. That's what I hear. He's a good husband. See, this is the most frightening picture of Eichmann. He's got a pet bunny, right? I don't imagine Eichmann with a pet bunny. I imagine him strangling a bunny. I don't imagine him sitting there like an ordinary man. So for me to force myself to have different interpretations and to notice contradictory information about whatever I'm considering, I think is really important. Aristotle called that the method of the dialectic. I can argue both sides of an issue, and I force my students to do that in ways that make them feel uncomfortable. It doesn't mean just because you can think of the affirmation of something doesn't mean that you condone it. But I can stop long enough to see, okay, I see where you're coming from on that issue, and I can argue your point to your satisfaction, I think is really important. One quick danger about perspective taking, it can just become an intellectual proposition, is I intellectually understand, but for few of us, it's not just intellectual. I put a year into the prioritization report, someone might think. We wrestled like crazy about this Decalogue exhibit. I had sleepless nights about it. You can imagine a person saying, I didn't eat for 2 days before I made this decision. The intellectual's error, that's a term from Antonio Gramsci, who says, you think you just have book knowledge and your body's not been affected, you don't have understanding. So Frederick Douglass said this. Douglass argued that one could not experience the ills of slavery while sitting in a reading chair. Now that's really interesting because he founded a newspaper. An individual must place himself or herself in the deep pine woods and analyze the sounds that shall pass through the chambers of your soul when you listen to slaves going to the master's house to get their allowance, singing songs of redemption. Hearing that and affecting your body in the deep pine woods is really important to Frederick Douglass, that it's a body event. So we're almost done. 3 quick questions about perspective taking. I find that perspective taking reveals the condition of my heart. So when I listen to your perspective, I take time to engage it. Here are 3 questions. 1, does perspective taking produce empathy? Am I able to place myself in your position, or do I even want to? 2nd, does it produce sympathy? Am I not sympathetic at all to your position? If I'm not, that's a condition of my heart. I need to step back and say, so after spending all this time understanding the angst you had in making this decision, or your position, I have no sympathy for you whatsoever? I think that's me as the communicator. Last, does perspective taking affect the relational level of my communication? Now the content, we're locked and loaded, right? You might have a really strong opinion about something, but the relational level is the amount of compassion between 2 individuals, it's the amount of acknowledgement between 2 individuals, and it's the amount of respect between 2 individuals. So if my perspective taking at the end of it, it hasn't changed how I talk about you, I think that's a problem on my end, that even listening to your heart behind this issue, I still, in some very harsh ways, critique what you have to say. I would hope that perspective taking causes me to sit back and say, I'm going to be careful with how I use my words here because I know your heart was in the right place when you did this. You care about the kingdom of God. You care about this university. I still think you're dead wrong on what you did. But I now appreciate your heart, your concern, and your compassion, and I'm going to recognize that in how I speak to you. Let me close with one quote from All Quiet on the Western Front. This is by a man named Eric Remarque. Yeah. We sat and listened to a pronunciation thing forever. Oh, no, we know, of course. Yes, Remarque, Eric Remarque. Thank you, Dr. Nlangwe. Comrade, so this is a German soldier has gotten turned around in World War I, and he's jumped into a French foxhole. Immediately, the French soldier bayonets him in the stomach. But he doesn't die right away. He slowly dies. Once he dies, this man now takes his wallet and is looking at photographs. And this is what he says, "Comrade, I did not want to kill you. If you jumped in here again, I would not do it if you would be sensible too. But you were only an idea to me before, an abstraction that lived in my mind and called forth its appropriate response. It was the abstraction I stabbed. But now, for the first time, I see that you were a man like me. I thought of your hand grenades, of your bayonet, of your rifle. Now I see your wife and your face and our fellowship. Forgive me, comrade. We always see it too late." Here's what I find remarkable about us as academics. Our feelings get hurt pretty quickly, right? I think it's more hurtful when fellow colleagues at Biola are harsh with my ideas and my perspective. Because out there we expect it, right? We get articles rejected from journals, we get publishers who are always critiquing us, and we always kind of feel a little bit less than. But here, when we're treated harshly, I think our feelings can get really hurt. I make the mistake that I was a debater in college, so I can kick into just the content realm and just argue ideas, but ideas are never disembodied. Ideas always have a history and a person behind it, and when I forget that is when I really hurt people's feelings. Because I can sit and argue an idea all day long, but people will say to me, but man, that was my idea, and I've worked on this forever, and for you just to step in and critique it like that? Man, I spent a year on that. And sometimes I forget that. I think we all want to think we're tough in the world of ideas, but man, all of us, I think our feelings get hurt pretty quickly. So perspective taking for me humanizes an issue, and for me it helps me to appreciate the power of my words because I'm speaking to a person, not an abstract idea.
Biola University prepares Christians to think biblically about everything, from science to business to education and the arts. Learn more at biola.edu.